Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times, a science and speculative fiction podcast. Short stories to stir the imagination by contemporary authors.
Hive Songs by Jeff C. Carter, with music by Fog Machine, read by Jean-Paul Garnier. Bodies careened over the waterfall, some face down, some in pieces. Some were locked in combat while others clung together for salvation, but they were doomed all the same. They stained the water green with their blood, clogged the whirlpools with their shredded wings, and littered the riverbank with twitching legs. A battered soldier hauled itself from the muck and proceeded through the motions of assessment and repair. The nearest corpse mound shivered with the scurrying limbs of a buried soldier. The first soldier attempted to sniff out friend or foe. There was no trace of scent, not even the soldier's own. In a rare display of panic, it hastily tested its sensory organs, tapping and waving its thick cables of antennae. It picked up the reek of frothy gore, pollen, and the peaty smell of the wetlands. There was no sense of self. Worse, there was no sense of other. Perhaps the identifying chemicals had been scrubbed away. The soldier paced in agitation, torn between the urge to assist the other and the urge to bite its head off. The most holy commandment etched into the architecture of its brain was, protect the hive, followed closely by, kill on contact. If the buried soldier was a member of its own hive, it could safely be ignored. For those that cannot serve themselves cannot serve the hive. If it was an enemy, it must die. Nothing could be done about the flailing creature until it was properly identified. The pacing soldier clicked its mandibles. This one cannot find the mark of the hive. Can that one detect the mark of the hive? The buried soldier dabbed the air with its own antennae and responded. This one has been soaked in blood and scent mixture. This one must cleanse. The first soldier dragged it onto the riverbank. They lay in the mud and tended to their own wounds. Their injuries set them apart, but that was mere visual clutter. They were genetically identical, with the same bright triangular heads, 6-limbed carapaces, and armor-banded abdomens. They had no use for flags, uniforms, or names. All that set them apart, all that mattered, was the mark of the hive. The first soldier chewed a non-functioning limb off at its upper joint. The second pried apart the mandibles of a severed head still clamped onto its wing. When the triage was complete, they extruded long black tongues to preen the mud and river weeds from their exoskeletons. They soon reached the limits of what they could reach. The rest was typically handled by nestmates. The first soldier chittered. We should groom each other. The second soldier raised its serrated limbs in a threat display. The first soldier continued. Score the area between my wings and I will score yours. That will provide our best chance to detect the mark of the hive. The second soldier lowered its forelimbs. Agreed. That will also give each of us the opportunity to kill each other. It scuttled over and set to work rooting the mites and fungus from the other soldier's back. The downpour of brutalized bodies slowed to a trickle. The air no longer trembled with the pulse of frenzied wings. The battle storm had drifted on the shifting wind, or perhaps one side had claimed victory. Neither outcome granted the stranded soldiers a reprieve. Their duty was to fight the other hive until its last defender had been slaughtered, its wretched queen annihilated, and her worthless brood plundered to nourish the conquerors. The stranded soldiers searched once more for chemical signatures in vain. Their sun glittered across their compound eyes as it withdrew from the charnel canyon, taking the heat they needed to dry their limp, wet wings. They clutched their delicate membranes around themselves to avoid the jagged rocks and watched the colors bleed away to gray. It was the first time the soldiers had experienced darkness since they had hatched from their larval chambers. Inside the hive, the press of bodies had kept them warm. Inside the hive, there was perfect order. The Holy Queen, her blessed brood, and the protection of the nameless legions. Outside the hive, there was only lonely darkness. It crawled over their shoulders like a parasite, leeching away their purpose. The first soldier felt the embrace of spiny limbs. "I will remain awake to keep us warm," the other soldier clicked. "And if I detect the wrong mark of the hive, I will kill you." It contracted its thick bundles of back muscle to provide heat. The first soldier vibrated its own wings with hive song, the comforting call and response of foraging vectors, and the oath of devotion to the Holy Queen. They shared regurgitated chunks of cannibalized enemies and dollops of sweet nectar. When the torpor overtook them, they shared a dream of the hive. They woke as the sunlight cascaded down the waterfall. The ceaseless water had purged the canyon of carnage overnight. The soldiers stirred and fanned out their wings. Neither could remember which of them had rescued the other. Soon, their glands would express the mark of the hive. The warming air would disperse the scent. Neither of them could avoid what happened after that. One of the soldiers twisted its antennae around its foreclaw. "This one will damage its sense organ." The other soldier stopped it. A soldier that cannot detect others has no place in the hive. It cannot share food or song. It can only cling to the outside and feed on parasites. Its jeweled wings thrummed to life. "This one will find its mark of the hive in the air," it chittered. "We will meet again, as nestmates or in the battle storm." In September by Noah Lloyd, with music by Johnny O'Donnell, read by Jean-Paul Garnier. It's a cool fall day in September, and I get to school early to look over my lesson plans. The classroom is empty, and someone has neglected to erase my blackboard overnight. It's a Tuesday, and the anniversary of my grandfather's death. I don't know why it's the anniversary of his death I always manage to remember. Not my great aunt's, not my father's, just his. It's 2001. It's been 6 years. I want to tell him about my new job, teaching physics at this little middle school in Middle Texas. He was always talking about how kids needed to get more science learning. I think he'd be proud of me. Maybe that's part of it. That I think he'd be proud of me. The old physicist seeing his grandson teaching physics to preteens. That makes me want to see him again. And that makes me remember the date of his death more than other people's. I don't know if my father or my great aunt would be proud of me. I want to tell him that I've fallen in love with a man and that we live together. A tall man with beautiful red hair. I have no idea how my grandfather felt about such things, but I want to tell him anyway. I want to convey to him how frustrating it is that we have to pretend to be roommates. use separate entrances into the small house we're renting to keep up appearances. We don't even go grocery shopping together. My lesson plan looks fine, and I look briefly around the room I've used for the past month. 12 large black tables with wooden legs, big enough for 2 students to sit abreast and look towards the front of the room, where 2 wide blackboards wait poised, freshly erased from my messy chalk diagrams. I have a couple of posters up, including an inspirational one left by my predecessor that claims, "Success, it's what you make of it." But it's not really my classroom yet. I take off my jacket, drape it around the chair behind my computer desk, and wheel over the projector. I pull out a fresh piece of acetate and start copying my notes onto it from the lesson plan. Today, they're learning about parabolic curves and projectile motion. I have a short video we'll watch that compares throwing a tennis ball to the space shuttle's trajectory. I'll teach the same lesson 6 times today, with a little more math thrown in for the honors students. Today's a Tuesday, but it was a Monday the year my grandfather died. Monday, September 11th, 1995. But it isn't even first period when I see him, standing in the doorway like, not like a ghost at all. Flesh and blood, like he was when I was a child. No, younger than he was when I was a child. I mean, I'd never seen him stand. He was wheelchair bound my entire childhood. But here he is, on his own legs. His stomach is flatter, his hair is darker. But for all the differences, it's him, my grandfather, who I watched die in a hospital bed 6 years ago. "We've got 6 minutes," he says before stepping into the hall. I check the digital clock over the door. 7:40. I follow him into the hall. I'm greeted by Miss Welch, who's pretty in a summer dress she's flung a shawl over. It seems like they keep the AC humming at 60 degrees. "Hi, Tom," she says, looking slightly up at me. She's got a big smile and straight blonde hair. "How's your morning?" "It's a little weird," I say, glancing at Grandpa. I don't know if she can't see him or if she just assumes he's another student's parent. He stands, watches this whole interaction with mild interest. "Oh, I'm sorry. Well, maybe we could have lunch together? Would that cheer you up?" Miss Welch has cautiously flirted with me like this since the beginning of the school year. Maybe I should introduce her to my tall, red-haired, handsome roommate. But then, I can't really blame her. I'm the only one anywhere near her age on the faculty. She can't be more than 24. "Maybe, Miss Welch, but I've got something I've got to take care of right now. I'll see you later, okay?" "Yeah, okay," she says, and as I start following Grandpa down the hall again, she calls out, "But call me Katie." Grandpa leads us to the double doors that form the school's entrance, down the short flight of concrete steps, past the flagpole, and into the grass lawn that surrounds the 2-story building. Students are already here, milling about and talking, and I spot Mr. Carpenter, the school resource officer, cruising for someone to sternly talk down to. Grandpa finds an empty bench beneath an oak tree and sits, and I join him. It is a gorgeous day. It's not too hot yet, though it'll climb into the 80s later, when the weather is the last thing any of us will be thinking of. It's sunny in a hard blue sky that's tempted by a few rolling clouds. Perfect. But I am sitting on a bench next to my dead grandfather. He checks his watch. We've only got 4 minutes now. Till what? Till I have to leave. But how are you even here? Grandpa, what the hell's going on? Did you know that the Earth has traveled 3,505,222,500 some odd miles since the day I died? That's a lot? He leans forward conspiratorially. You've traveled almost 19 light seconds. I don't get it. My point, Thomas, is that time travel is extremely difficult to achieve with any accuracy. Why? I'm more likely to wind up in the middle of nowhere, literally somewhere out there in space, than to land where I want on Earth. Time? I'm aghast, jaw dropped, stumped, really. I wanted to see you, Tom. That's it, really. Where I come from, you haven't even been born yet. Steph, your mom, I mean, she's not even out of high school. I stare at him, then compulsively check my watch. It's 7:43. 3 minutes left. Then he puts one of his hands over mine. It's big. As big as I remember it, which surprises me. I thought people were supposed to be smaller in real life than in your memories. But his hand is huge and calloused, and then I smell his aftershave, and I'm thrown down a chain of memories, more like after images, of sneaking into his room to play with things, adult things, that I shouldn't have played with. A straight razor and shaving cream, a drawer full of nail clippers, buttons, and thread, a huge steel screw he took from a shipping yard in 1944. And then I see him in his hospital bed. He's confused, lost, and vanishing. I'm there with my mother and my grandma and Grandpa's aftershave. It's there, too. My grandmother had continued shaving him through the long decline. He squeezes my hand. Tom, it's gonna get bad for a while. What do you mean? He shrugs. You'll find out in a minute. He glances again at his wrist, at a gold-plated watch. I have that watch tucked away in a sock drawer at home. Grandma gave it to me after he died. Well, in 2 minutes, give or take. Then he's placing one of those calloused hands on my cheek and saying, "Tell me everything." I tell him what I can in 2 minutes. I tell him about Rob, my redhead, and he doesn't bat an eyelash, probably because there's no time. I cry a little, telling him how hard it is pretending we're not what we are. And I tell him a little bit about teaching and how I hope he's proud of me, and he nods and says he is. I want to tell him about my year living in Greenwich Village, about my 4 years at NYU, about how sad I was when our schnauzer Pepper died, but there isn't time. It's like he's an image projected through acetate, and the projector is flickering. A light is coming from some far-off place, reaching out to illuminate him, and without it, he will simply fade. He leans forward again, this time putting a heavy hand on the back of my neck and kissing me on the forehead. Then he's gone. It's 7:46 a.m., and in a few minutes, when I go inside, I will hear all about the Twin Towers and the 4 planes. And in a few days, I will hear the bullhorn speech, and yes, I will know that it's going to get bad for a while. But the knowing of it isn't enough. All I've done is told my secret to a dead man. Even seeing him again, I think, as I sit beneath an oak tree on a perfect September day, isn't enough. In this episode of Simultaneous Times, you heard Hive Songs by Jeff C. Carter, with music by Fog Machine, and In September by Noah Lloyd, with music by Johnny O'Donnell. Theme music by Dane Luscombe. Come visit us at our bookstore in Joshua Tree or online at spacecowboybooks.com. Don't forget to subscribe and visit us on Instagram and Twitter. We'd love to know what you think of the show.